We are so happy all of you are with us tonight to discuss the COVID-19 vaccine. We have an awesome panel set up for you tonight. A couple housekeeping rules before President Flowers jumps in here. This session will be being recorded. We're going to start now, so just be aware that's happening. We would ask everyone to mute your phones and keep them muted. If your line is producing feedback or distractions, we do have moderators. They're working with us to monitor the chat and the questions, et cetera. So if you have too much going on, we may need to ask you to hang up and call back, but please do so. Questions will be posted in the chat on Facebook just so we can make sure we consolidate the questions, and we're going to get a nice streamlined flow because we have a lot of ground to cover tonight. So we're excited about that. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to President Flowers to get us started.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks for coming out here. Thank you for the committee. I got to give a real shout out to both Cynthia and Keisha for pulling this together. As much as the COVID vaccine, the COVID reality is a reality, we still have to remain being organizers so this type of information can get to you. In the NAACP, it is the case that we are structured in such a way that, you know, even though we're having these challenges with the entire world, we're structured in such a way that with our committee structure, we can respond to these issues in a way that we can keep the community informed, and more importantly, in this case, talking about the vaccine, to be the facilitators of information. We're going to get into the details of that, but I do also want to acknowledge that we just had our recent elections. We'll be doing our swearing in the coming weeks. We haven't had our first planning meeting, but I do want to acknowledge the folks who are on the line. There's a long list of candidates and I can't remember all of them, so I won't mention all of them. But I will say that we'll be introducing the team. I want you to stay in tune about that. But ultimately, we are in a state right now, a lot of people look at 2020 and say it was the worst thing in the world. It actually is the case that because we as organizers with NAACP and other organizations have been at the ready, I think that we are in the best situation ever in the middle of some type of pandemic to respond effectively so that we can save lives. You know, you may not have woken up in 2020, thought that you were going to be a lifesaver or that you were going to save your own life, but it is our responsibility to do that. And that's where the rubber meets the road. So I'm very proud to be a part of this movement, to just give the information exchange, to be available, to even have PPE for families who cannot afford them. And we do have those. So if you need PPE, contact me and we can get you PPE so that your family can be covered. We'll be making an announcement in coming weeks about the reality of what's happening with the opening of the school. So stay tuned for that. But with that said, and again, I want to emphasize that this is a worldwide pandemic with many, many layers. But the only thing that we can do as organizers, because I think that we have what it takes to respond to this stimuli so that we can be successful in getting on the other side. And that's the way we're structured. And I hope that you can join the NAACP so we can continue this type of information. I want to acknowledge the panelists who have stepped up and come from all over the country from what I see. And it's going to be helpful in allowing us to get the information that we need. So thank you, and I look forward to this presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Flowers. So like I said, hoping everyone is muted, we're going to go ahead and get into the panel. I would, again, note, we're going to take questions at the end of each presentation. We have 4 excellent speakers, so we'll probably do 1 or 2 questions. If you have a question, please place it in the chat so that we can have our moderators read them back. We'll take 1 or 2 at the beginning, and at the end, if we have time, then we'll go ahead and cover some more ground. So our panelists will include this evening, grateful for the presence of Dr. Rhea Craigen, family physician, Dr. Dawn Marcelle, MD. She's the director of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Department of Public Health. Sherese Buie, our own EEOC Baltimore Field Office Representative, and then Maria Roach, Executive Producer at the Black News Channel. So we have a varied program for you tonight. We're going to go ahead and start with Dr. Rhea Craigen. Dr. Rhea Craigen is a board certified family physician with 30 years in practice. She's raised it right here in Columbia, Maryland. So she's one of ours, Wild Lake. She's an educator of medical students, resident nurse practitioners, and physician assistants. She is also a recipient of the Moderna vaccine. So we can also hear about her experience. And Dr. Craigen believes in honest discussion to promote understanding and communication.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rhea Craigen, and thank you, President Flowers, for allowing me to come and speak to the NAACP. And thank you, Cynthia Fikes and Keisha Shepard, for helping to set this up, and the Total Health Committee and my co-speakers. I wanted to do this talk because of what I've seen in my life and the lives of friends and family with the pandemic that we've had with COVID-19. And every 22 seconds, somebody is dying from COVID-19. And so during this talk, more than 163 people will lose their lives. And Blacks are 4 times more likely to die than whites from COVID. Cynthia also mentioned that I got the Moderna vaccine. I got my 2nd shot yesterday, and I was extremely happy to receive it. Gives me a little bit of peace of mind. And getting the vaccine doesn't mean that you can never get COVID. It means that your body will be able to fight it off quickly and efficiently. And so when you get the first shot, you're about 55% protected. And when you get the 2nd shot, you're about 94% protected with the Moderna vaccine and 95% protected with the Pfizer vaccine. So when I went yesterday, I knew that the 2nd shot gives you more symptoms than the first shot. And so after I got my shot, I'm waiting in the waiting area, the 15 minutes that they observe you. And I started to get pain in my arm. And I said, yay. And there was a woman who was in the room, and she was asking questions. She's like, well, I've heard the 2nd shot makes you feel worse. And I was a little concerned and nervous. And I'm over there doing the happy dance because my arm is starting to hurt. And then before I leave, I'm starting to get a little achy, and that's telling me that my immune system is working and that this shot is doing what it's supposed to do. With that, I'm going to start into my talk. We're going to talk about vaccines, specifically the COVID-19 vaccine, the development of the vaccine, common concerns about COVID-19 vaccines, the COVID-19 symptoms, treatments, and then being a wise internet consumer and watching out for what people are sharing on social media. At the end of the whole talk, after everyone else goes, I'll share some personal Howard County information. So SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that causes COVID-19 disease. And you see some of these symptoms that people can have when they get the disease. However, 30% of the population who has COVID-19 do not have any symptoms. They're asymptomatic. So they could be next to you at the grocery store or sitting with you at the indoor restaurant that you decided to go to, and you take off your mask and they take off their mask, and you may end up bringing home more than some leftovers from the dining room or wherever else you happen to be. Most common are, when you first get the disease, are fever, cough, and body aches, shortness of breath, and occasionally diarrhea. But any of these, and the loss of the taste and smell. About 60% of people get that. So complications from the COVID-19 disease are things like lung disease, which you guys have heard of, but then there's a lot of things you haven't heard of. With the lung disease, it feels kind of like you're drowning on dry land. You just can't get enough air. But there's things that people get with like blood clots and gives them strokes or heart attacks, heart disease. There's a thing with brain fog where you cannot concentrate. You look like a perfectly normal human, but it's really hard for you to be able to process information. And it makes it very difficult for you to go back to work after you've had COVID-19. And then the nerve damage that people don't hear about much, difficulty walking, moving, people having to do physical therapy in order to get back to functioning. And of course, the really bad one, which is death. The other thing that people are just starting to talk about more are the long haulers. People that have had COVID and weeks to months later, they are still having symptoms. And just because you live after getting the disease does not mean that you live well. So what's a vaccine? Most people are aware of vaccines. You know, you get them as a child, you get tetanus boosters, flu shots. So a vaccine teaches your body how to fight off an infection. It triggers our immune system to produce antibodies, which surround a virus and keep it from getting into our cells. And it activates other immune cells to fight off what it thinks is an infection. Our bodies learn to protect us against future infection with the disease. And the great thing is that you don't have to get sick in order to be protected and to be able to fight off infection. The other thing is that vaccines have been around for a long time, and people forget that, you know, because they got them as a baby or they got them just before they went to elementary school, there's lots of diseases that we don't have anymore or we don't have to get sick from because we got vaccines. Things like rubella, which caused hearing loss, things like polio, which caused paralysis. And, you know, decades ago, people had to have 6 and 8 children because only 2 or 3 were going to survive. And otherwise, so now we have the luxury of not having a whole lot of kids if we want to. If we want to, we can. If we don't want to, we don't have to. But, you know, they're not dying from preventable diseases that vaccines can help us with. So we know how to do vaccines. I mentioned the tetanus shot and the flu vaccine that most people are familiar with. So vaccine development, normally it takes about 10 years or longer to make a vaccine. And the COVID-19 vaccine, as you've seen in this last year with Pfizer and Moderna, we've done it in about 10 months. There's a couple coming down the pike in the next few months that will probably be approved for use. So why should we trust a vaccine that's developed faster than usual? Well, vaccines are like recipes for ice cream, right? We've got chocolate, we've got vanilla, and we know how to do those. They're, you know, you can get them anywhere, you know what to expect. But if somebody mentions a new recipe for a different flavor like passion fruit, people are like, whoa, that's new, that's exotic, that's different. So mRNAs are like passion fruit ice cream. It's the same process. It's the same reaction in our body. And it just sounds new and different. But we know how to do this because we've been making mRNA vaccine for decades. Since 1989, we've been making mRNA vaccines. However, this is the first one that we've approved for use in a wide population. I don't know if anybody remembers Zika. It was bothering pregnant women and causing miscarriages and birth defects. And SARS, which we saw in the Asian countries, and it never in significant numbers reached our shores. So we dodged that bullet. and it's used in cancer treatment to target certain cells. And they have been phase 1 trials in humans before. So this is not new. It's just a new flavor of ice cream. So normal vaccine development, we usually start at the top of the slide. We usually start in animals, and we do find out if it works in them. And then we do a small trial, a phase 1 trial with a few people just to see the safety. And then we move on, but then we have to get approval with money and everything. I should say, the difference between the usual process and this process is that everyone, because it's a global pandemic, everyone wanted to get this vaccine to work so that we had a solution to everyone's problem. It's something that can affect every country and every state and every county. So the whole research world pivoted to work on COVID. And that's one of the reasons why we were able to speed things up. But so phase 1 trial is safety. Phase 2 trial, a larger number of people to see if it works. Phase 3 trial is to see how effective it is. And at each of these stages, you have to present it to a regulatory board. They have to take a look at it. And then you have to convince people to give you money to continue into each next phase. And then at the end, when you find out you have an effective vaccine, that's when you start making the vaccine. That's how it normally works and why it takes 10 years. This time with SARS-CoV-2, we started in the animals. We've been doing that for decades. Phase 1 trials, we knew how to do that, and we did that with these 2 vaccines too. But we also overlapped it with phase 2. So the government threw money at this problem, and so they did not have to wait for approvals and to beg people to give them more money to be able to move on to the next phase. All they had to show was that it was safe in phase 1, it worked in phase 2, and that what kind of effectiveness was it going to be in phase 3. And before phase 3 studies were done, they started manufacturing it, even before they knew if it was going to work. So I know that maybe you heard on the news that Merck's trial was stopped because it was not effective. So they had money thrown at them too, but they did not cut the mustard and they were stopped. There are regulatory boards that monitor this independently from the researchers. So there are people with eyes on this the whole time. So how does the mRNA vaccine work? They took the spike protein. Everybody's seen the picture of the coronavirus by now. It's on the news every day. So the little things that stick up are the spike proteins, and that's how the coronavirus gets into the cell. It's the key that lets them get in. And they took the spike protein and they made a sequence, a recipe for the spike protein. They put it inside a lipid coating, and then they made a vaccine, and that's what's injected. It only lasts 10 minutes in your body, 10 whole minutes. So it doesn't stay around. It's not going to be there next year. Its job is to present the spike protein as something foreign, and your body says, okay, I'm going to make some copies of this. I'm going to put it on the muscle cell, and your body's immune system is going to see it and make antibodies that their job is to surround a infection and keep them from getting into a cell. So that's the process of making this vaccine. And by the way, for the Moderna vaccine, the patent is held by a Black woman, Dr. Corbett. And there are wonderful physicians, researchers, and people of color in every aspect of this process. They're at the FDA, they're at the CDC, they're at the NIH, and they have regulatory boards that monitor for reactions, and they're there too. So I want you to know that this is a process that is the most transparent we've ever had for vaccine development. Usually we don't know about what's going on until you get to the end of a study, but this one, we know everything. And you can go look it up online yourself. So there's different types of coronaviruses. I'm sorry, there are different types of coronaviruses, but for the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the COVID-19 vaccines, the mRNAs are the ones that we currently have approved for emergency use authorization, Pfizer and Moderna. And then there are others that are coming down the pike. Johnson & Johnson will probably be approved in 1 to 2 weeks. And AstraZeneca, who Maria Roach was a participant in the AstraZeneca trial, should probably be approved by spring. And there's others, Novavax, which also is probably going to be approved in the United States. There's others, but they probably won't be approved in the United States. So, and other countries are making their own versions. Japan has one, China has one, Russia has one. But none of these vaccines can give you COVID-19 disease. So with the Pfizer and the Moderna, I just want to quickly take a peek at what they did with the studies. Pfizer had 43,000 plus participants, and they used ages 16 and up. It was a demographic, they did participants that represented our typical population. So if you want to know if there were Hispanics, there were Hispanics. If you want to know if there were African Americans, there were. Same for Asians. And this is their breakdown. Black people are about 13% of the population. And so they got pretty close. They're about 10% in each study. The goal of the study was to prevent illness and death, not to prevent infection, but to prevent illness and death. So they wanted to make sure you weren't going to get sick and die. It's a 2-dose vaccine, both of them. And the Pfizer is 95% effective. The Moderna is 94% effective. And they had people in the study with all kinds of diseases, hypertension, diabetes, obesity. There were elderly people, and it was effective across all age groups. The common COVID-19 concerns, I get woken up by friends and family who like, well, Dr. Craigen, what do you think of this question or that question? Or they'll send me a video from something that they saw online. So I thought I'd go over some of the questions that people are having. How do I trust the vaccine given the historical treatment of Black people in the community? My daughter said to me last night, she said, "Thank you, Mom, for raising me to be able to navigate the world that is not set up to benefit her." And she was talking about racism and sexism. And she said, we have to learn to swim instead of drown in a system that is not made for us. And so there is racism, there is inequalities in healthcare. The Tuskegee experiment, no patient was given syphilis. What happened was they had syphilis and they did not give them the antibiotic penicillin that could cure them. They just let the disease run its course, and it led to, problems with their health. And because of that, they made consent rules so that you have to consent to something before any procedure is done, or you get into a vaccine trial. Henrietta Lacks, she had cervical cancer, and they took some of her cells and found that they continued to divide forever, and they're still dividing to this day. They did not ask her permission. They did not give her any compensation, but they used her cells and they still use them for research to this day. The family has been doing lawsuits, and one of the things that you should take from people who put barriers in front of you is how do you continue to live your life in the best way, despite what is put before us. So there are privacy laws like HIPAA and other things where you have access to your medical chart and you can request it. If you have a doctor that's stupid, then get a new doctor. You don't have to stay with someone, or just because they say something doesn't mean that you have to follow their advice. And the next question, will it change my DNA? No, it will not. In the previous, well, it didn't show the nucleus, but the RNA doesn't go into the nucleus. It can't change your DNA. And like I said, it only lasts 10 minutes in your body. Do I still need to wear a mask and social distance after getting the vaccine? And the answer is yes. Remember, they were looking to decrease disease and to decrease death. So they did not study whether it keeps you from getting sick. I mean, it keeps you from getting the disease. Now, Moderna did a small pilot in their study that said that there were some people and they looked to see if they got infected. And it did seem to decrease infection in people. But that wasn't their goal or their endpoint. They just wanted less people to be sick. And it's 94 and 95% effective. So you still need to wear a mask, because if you're in a room full of COVID, you might get a mild infection. And that's the key, mild, that you won't get all of those symptoms that I gave you before. And you don't have to end up being on dialysis or needing physical therapy. The other thing is that between shot 1 and shot 2, shot 1 only gives you 55% effectiveness. Shot 2 gets you to the 94, 95%. So wear a mask and social distance. What does social distancing mean? Just like the NBA teams, you need your house to be a bubble, that only the people in your household are around you without masks on, and that you don't let the cousin from across the country come and stay with you, and you don't go visit your grandma who you haven't seen in a while because it's Christmas, because you don't know if you have the disease and can spread it to them, and you don't know if they have it. Remember, 30% are asymptomatic. They don't have any symptoms, and yet they can give you COVID-19. And with the new variants, which I'll get to in a minute, it's much more contagious, and it doesn't take long for you to get the COVID-19. So should I take the vaccine if I've already had COVID-19 disease? And the answer is yes, because we have seen that people who get the disease and get sick, maybe hospitalized, they can get it again. And that getting the disease naturally, you get it, you get over it, you start going back to your life, hopefully. 6 months, 9 months later, you can get it again. And they found that the second infection tends to be more serious than the first one. So they recommend that 90 days after you've resolved your COVID-19 symptoms, you can get your vaccination. Side effects of the vaccine. I had them yesterday, yay. Fever, I didn't have fever. I had body aches, and I had, that was actually about it. So arm soreness and body aches is what I had. But all these other ones are common. Nausea, enlarged lymph nodes, headache. And the allergic reactions have gotten a lot of press on the news, but it's only about 11 people in 1 million shots. We're at about 45 million shots now. And, that's a minuscule number of people with infections. Now, they're usually anaphylactic infections. Some people take their EpiPens with them, or when they get the shot, they have EpiPens there. People recover and do well, and it's not a contraindication to doing the vaccine. The only contraindications is if you are allergic to the ingredients in the vaccine. And I'm not going to read any of this. You can look at it while I talk. But the one that tends to cause the most allergies is the polyethylene glycol, PEG. And that is in a whole lot of things. It's in toothpaste, it's in shampoo, it's in cosmetics. But so people who are allergic to it kind of usually know they're allergic to it. And if you don't know, you're probably not allergic to it because it's in everything. So the thing they do for people who are allergic is they keep them 30 minutes instead of 15, and they have EpiPens on board. There's an immediate allergic reaction, and sometimes people have an allergic reaction 5 days later. So people who say, oh, a month later, that from someone who got a COVID shot, that they had a bad reaction, it's not from the COVID shot, because that shows up within a week and it only stays in your body for 10 minutes. So the immediate symptoms that you have, 24 to 48 hours, and then you're better. Okay. People who have food allergies can still get the shot, and the vaccine had to be put in a liquid bubble because it's so unstable, kind of like an M&M, to protect the chocolate from melting, okay? So it doesn't last long. So can I take the vaccine if I'm pregnant or breastfeeding? The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists say the vaccine should not be withheld from pregnant or breastfeeding women who meet the criteria for vaccination. So yes, in fact, it's recommended because there are studies out just this past week, last week, in the Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA, talking about the fact that they have increased miscarriages and death. And so getting the vaccine is better than getting the disease. Can I mix and match vaccines? Probably not. Now, the CDC is waffling on that because we don't have enough vaccine. And is one vaccine better than the other? No. And we don't know how long the vaccine protects you for. And we don't know the long-term side effects yet because they're going to study it for another 2 years. The variants make it more contagious, and the South African one slightly more deadly, but that's the reason why you need good masks to keep you safe. Other COVID-19 treatments, when you get the disease, they give you sometimes steroids, vitamin D. You can look in your local area for monoclonal therapy if you start having COVID-19 symptoms that will prevent you from getting serious disease. You can check that website and go look for it and then ask your doctor to write you a prescription. This is what the former president got. And Black people should be able to get access to these treatments too. And then these are some good sites for you to research yourself what is going on with the COVID-19 and not to get it from social media because it's very transparent. All the information is there for you. Just don't share it. If you don't know, ask somebody before you share more information and do your part not to spread the disease because we are all in this together.
Excellent, excellent. Dr. Craigen, thank you. Great information. We actually do have one question from the chat, if this is a good time.
Sure.
Okay. Keisha?
Hi. So the first question is, if you get the first shot, then contract COVID-19, do you have to get the second shot, or do you also need to get the first shot again, so start over?
You do not need to start over. After you recover from your COVID-19 disease, and you can get the second shot. You do not need to start over.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the chat, Keisha? No?
Nope, no more questions from the chat. Oh wait,
well,
there just came, one just came in.
Okay,
just a matter
of housekeeping. In the interest of time, we're going to answer 2 or 3 in between the speakers, and then we'll do the larger questions at the end so we get a chance to hear from all of our panelists. So we'll take maybe 1 or 2 more questions from the chat, and then we're going to move to the next speaker.
Okay, I think this is relevant. Can I still spread the virus if I had my shot? Yes,
you can still spread it because it takes a while for you to develop immunity. The first dose gives you, exposes your body to the COVID-19 spike protein, and your body starts to mount a small response, but you need the second dose to get to your 95% effectiveness. And so between your first and second shots, about a month, you can get the disease, you can spread the disease.
Good, thank you.
Dr. Craigen, thank you. I know we will hear from you again to talk about local issues in Howard County. So let's kind of keep the panel moving. So our next panelist is Dr. Dawn Marcelle. She again is the director of Baton Rouge, Louisiana Health Department. And Dr. Marcelle is actually a pediatrician in Baton Rouge, and she's been in practice for more than 20 years. So we are grateful for her to come with us tonight. Dr. Marcelle.
Thank you for having me. It's truly a pleasure to be here. I am board certified in pediatrics, and for any of you who have any personal or professional exposure to peds, you know, vaccines is a large part. Vaccines are a large part of what we do. And so I was very honored to be invited to speak here with you. So Dr. Craigen gave an excellent presentation. And so I'll just try to speak briefly from a public health perspective. First of all, the title of her talk, Getting the Facts, that is why we're here. We want to give you facts to arm you with information, not to cause alarm, so that you can make informed decisions and be comfortable and confident in the decisions that you make regarding your health and well-being when it comes to COVID-19, as well as getting the vaccine. When I think about public health, the difference between medicine, or one difference between medicine and public health, if I am speaking to you one-on-one as your doctor and I prescribe a certain medication for you and you're non-compliant, your individual health is adversely impacted. But from a public health perspective, if I prescribe a medication to you and you are non-compliant, then everybody's going to get sick. It's not just you, it's everybody. This is bigger than any one of us, and it impacts all of us. And all of us will be required to be well again. And when we return to normal, that may not ever be what it was pre-COVID, but that's not necessarily a bad thing either. From a public health perspective, as President Flowers and Dr. Craigen mentioned, this is a pandemic. It's a worldwide event going on. From a public health perspective, we look at conditions that are endemic, so localized diseases within a certain locality or a population of people. Then we look at outbreaks, which are sudden incidents, but still very localized; epidemics, which are broader geographically. And then we have pandemics, which is where we are now. It's global, it's literally worldwide, it's easily transmissible, and people are dying from it. It causes death. And so that was a part of the drive in the vaccines being so focused in getting them. But to Dr. Craigen's point, it may be fast, but it wasn't new. The current vaccine platform that we're on was already established from previous research since the late 80s, used in cancer therapeutic injections. And she also made a good point. That is true. The government put a bet. Before they got all the final results, they really believed in it from the science that they had. And so manufacture was starting in the process. And again, to Dr. Craigen's point, this was very focused worldwide, internationally. So you had some of your best scientific minds with both time and significant resources directed to development of this vaccine. And safety was not overlooked in EUA approval. The FDA took a lot of input from researchers and committees, particularly ACIP, the American Committee for Immunization Practices, which has done this for decades now. I guess I can go into my slides, please. And so, so you can see some things. This slide set was created a week ago, and already we have differences. Next slide. Thank you. So in Louisiana, last week, a week and a day ago, our total cases were at 244. We are now up over 150,000 cases to 394,909 today, and up 2,000 COVID-19 deaths. And I don't share this information because it's good news, but I share this information to just point out the severity of it, the realness of it, the continued spread of it in the context of active efforts. Good news for us here in the Baton Rouge area is that our ICU bed capacity has actually increased. We are, even though we are seeing more cases, we are finding decreased ICU admissions. And we do think that some of that, this is anecdotal as of now, but we do think some of that is a result of the monoclonal antibody use that Dr. Craigen mentioned. All summer long, we were just 2 or 3 beds away from not having any. However, our hospital systems locally really played well together and partnered to help one another. We ended up having a facility that was a recently closed hospital in the last 5 years. And so we were able to get that hospital administration and that board to reopen the hospital. That's really what saved us and maintain the integrity of our hospital infrastructure. Because one of the things is that if your COVID cases increase and your hospitalizations increase, if you have a heart attack, if you're in a motor vehicle accident, if you have a stroke, there is no hospital bed. There is no hospital bed available for you. And so it's not just for COVID, it's also for health and well-being in a broader sense. So effectiveness and safety, we really are confident that the COVID vaccine tools will be helpful and that safety was not compromised, even though the timeline was swifter than most. And as Dr. Craigen stated, 2 of the vaccines, specifically Pfizer and Moderna, do indicate greater than 94% effectiveness. Now, okay, you know, if 90% effectiveness, that still means that there is a small chance you can get it, but there is significantly decreased likelihood that you will contract the disease. One thing I would like to reiterate, because it is that important, stems from the last question about transmissibility, status post-vaccination. That part has really not been well examined as uniformly. And so our recommendations here, we are absolutely approaching it as if it is transmissible, because we can't prove that it's not just yet. It may be, but we don't know that definitively, like we believe we know some other things. And as Dr. Craigen said, it is so important that even post-vaccination, you really want to continue to exercise the public health measures to mitigate, such as social distancing, hand washing, and mask wearing. And again, no steps were skipped, and we do believe it's safe. So these slides really indicate the priorities. These are based on CDC guidelines. They are on CDC's website. We have adapted them for the state of Louisiana. The biggest difference that we have was a week or 2 ago, the federal government decreased the age or stated the age to 65. We are keeping it at 70 and above right now because the vaccine supply is so incredibly limited. Our state has a population of about 4.5 million. That does include kids, but we get about 58,000 doses per week. And that is a combination of both Pfizer and Moderna products. And so we are really still dealing with a very, very limited amount, but this is the general guideline that we will adhere to. And we are now in phase 1B tier 2, but we are still actively immunizing the phase 1, tier 1, phase 1A, tier 1 group, which are your hospital workers, your frontline workers, and also workers in the nursing home settings as well. Dr. Craigen already covered this, but really both Moderna and Pfizer vaccines have received FDA authorization for emergency use. So when and if you see EUA, it's emergency use authorization. It is a process that is rigorous, but the time frame is shorter than the routine longer process for FDA approval, but they go through EUA because there is a clear need for it, and it is truly believed to be a life-saving measure. This FDA emergency use authorization means that clinical trials have shown that the vaccine has an effective defense against COVID-19. And FDA and CDC will continue to monitor safety and effectiveness data as they continue to administer the vaccine. In the trials, there were more than 70,000 people for each. One had about 35, another had about 40, looking at the vaccine safety and efficacy or effectiveness. And so we also feel pretty comfortable with what we've seen. We have not seen very many side effects. We have had no anaphylactic or severe effects from it. It is recommended anywhere it's given in any setting. There is a 15-minute wait period. So we have people staged in a group setting if we're able to do small mass vaccination events to just ensure with medical personnel on site that everybody is fine afterwards, or there are no problems. And there is a long-standing process by CDC in the VAERS system, the vaccine adverse event reporting system that they've always done for every vaccine that is ever administered to track safety. And that also is being implemented. We do believe there's light at the end of the tunnel. If we were talking a month ago, I would definitely have said it is definitely going to get worse before it gets better. Right now, we are hopeful that there will be promise in the vaccine itself. The concern right now is how these variants will play in the context of the vaccines because they were not a part of the original trials. It is believed that the UK variant, there will be some protective effect against the UK variant in the currently authorized vaccines for use for emergency use. The South African variant is being tested. And there is also a Brazilian variant as well. And so having variant viral sequences is really not unusual. In fact, COVID-19 is variant. Coronaviruses were first described as an entity in the mid-60s. I want to say 1965 to be exact. And it's coronaviruses along with rhinoviruses being those are really the primary viruses that cause the cold. There was a coronavirus variant that caused SARS in late 2002, early 2003, and SARS-CoV-2, which is this current variant, is a variant of coronavirus. COVID-19, CO is corona, VI virus, D disease, and the 19 is because it was officially described as a separate clinical disease entity in December of 2019, hence we call it COVID-19. But it's novel coronavirus SARS-CoV-2, and it's novel because it in and of itself is a variant. And so we are seeing the course of evolution and viral replication of this coronavirus that is given names because it's endemic in these certain places, i.e. UK. South African, which I want to say has now been identified in the US as well, in South Carolina, and Brazilian. And this slide really just reiterates what has already been said, is the vaccine does not eliminate the need for basic public health measures of hand washing, masking, and social distancing. So COVID vaccine, la.gov, that's really local information, but it's what we do so that people can know where we have vaccines in the state. Last week, we had 1,700 sites. This week, we have 1,800 sites. People are continuing to enroll. The provider site is a CDC form. It is not a state form. So across the country, any site that wants to be a provider can use this form and submit it through their local systems to CDC to be a site to provide COVID-19 vaccine. So Some of us, I actually just said the 1,800 providers now, and that does include hospitals, pharmacies, clinics, nursing homes, and pharmacies are chains, pharmacies are local independent pharmacies. And so we have a comprehensive network of providers, and we do try to monitor and track. We have an automatic system called Links that we've used for over a decade now with our Vaccine for Children program. And so we have now added COVID-19 into that so that at any site that a vaccine is given, we will be able to track it on the front end and where it's distributed, as well as having it entered once it's given so we can keep count to know who's got what. The current vaccine requires 2 doses. Links, that is the system I was just speaking of. And one of the things that we've been doing is setting up that second appointment when we schedule your first appointment so that you'll be ready. Initially, the federal government under the previous administration said they were holding the second doses. Then they said they were releasing everything, but then we found out there wasn't a lot of anything that was there to release. And so as a state, we've been tracking the doses that we've been getting and ensuring that we have enough for the first doses that have been given while continuing to give first doses. Because of some of the delay in the limited supply and vaccine distribution, everybody may not always get that 21-day or 28-day dose. And so it is said that you can give up to 4 to 6 weeks after dose 1. My personal recommendation is to still try to stick to what was approved because that is what we know. But, you know, doing the best with what you have. And also, it is our recommendation that if your dose 1 was Pfizer, let your dose 2 be Pfizer. If your dose 1 is Moderna, let your dose 2 be Moderna. I am in between doses of Moderna, and I didn't even feel it going in. My flu shots and my booster shots, my tetanus booster shot, it's hurt more. This didn't hurt at all. You could feel the stick, but that was it. I was sore the next day or 2, and then I was fine. And my dose 2 is next Tuesday. The last thing, I'm sorry, if I could just mention health equity. That is a talk in and of itself. I do not want to be long on that, but I cannot iterate enough how important that is because we are disproportionately impacted adversely by COVID. And while COVID didn't cause the discrepancies that we see, it clearly pulled back the cover beyond the capacity to deny the longstanding inequities and disparities in not just health, but in education, in jobs, the service jobs. That's a part of the reason we were dying more as well, because we don't all have jobs you can sit and work at home or have health benefits and things to get access to care long before now. The digital divide that came out with kids staying home, all of these things have been highlighted by COVID and I think are a part of COVID. And from a public health perspective, as we look to help decrease the disparities here, one of the things we use to identify pharmacies are CDC's SVI Social Vulnerability Index map to see where we're placing pharmacies and sites for points of access, because many of our neighborhoods have pharmacy deserts and people can't always get to them. And 2 other public health conditions that have come up are mental health and what this has done for mental health for communities, as well as racism. And so those are also community public health conditions that we are looking at as we address COVID. And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Marcelle. Excellent points, particularly bringing in the national perspective. And there have been some conversations about the timing between vaccines. Keisha, very quickly, do we have any questions?
There was a question before, and I think that maybe Dr. Marcelle may be able to answer it, especially with health equity. Why is it that when people are obese, they're more susceptible to COVID-19?
Good question.
Obesity impacts not just COVID-19, but also many of the underlying comorbidities, specifically type 2 diabetes and also hypertension. What we have found here is that a large proportion of the decedents from COVID-19 here, people had high blood pressure, and then they had diabetes. And also with obesity, while some of it is genetic, some of it is nutrition. What have you been exposed to? Exercise, the strength of your vital organs, like your heart and lungs, from routine exercise or lack thereof. What has been your chronic access or your ongoing exposure to healthy foods? I mean, what's the reserve that your immune system is working with and that your body is working with? And moving around and mobility. I think it's multifactorial. That's a start, but I can also look further into that when we put out the final piece of this and specifically add more to that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Marcelle. It was
You're
excellent.
welcome. Thank you.
So, Rhea Roach, executive producer of Black News Channel. She is actually a participant in the AstraZeneca trial, as well as a 12-year breast cancer survivor who's used her survivorship to comfort and encourage sister friends on their journey to raise funds for breast cancer research. A storyteller at heart, Rhea has produced long and short format digital content for NBC News, BET News, PBS, the U.S. State Department, and OZY Media. She currently serves as the executive producer of the Black News Channel's Documentary and Investigation Unit. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over the panel to Rhea Roach. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Sure.
Good evening, everyone. And first, I just say thank you, God, that we're all here, we're healthy. This has been a lovely reunion. I am seeing first my childhood friend, Dr. Rhea Craigen. We've known each other and got each other through trigonometry in 10th grade. So she's always had a heart for people. So the presentation was incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for that. And Dr. Marcelle, it's exactly your last point on health equity and disparities is the reason why I decided to participate in the Oxford AstraZeneca trial. As Cynthia shared, I am a breast cancer survivor, and it's thanks to research that I am cancer-free for 12 years. I lost my dear beloved twin sister, Janet, 3 years ago, and she fought a good fight, 16 years. Ultimately, the cancer overtook her. But where the doctors had given her 1 year, thanks to tremendous medication, thanks to her strong faith, she was with us for 16 years. And I think sometimes when we look at medicines, we forget that whether it's our medication for diabetes or high blood pressure or the chemotherapies or the radiation, all of that is on the backs of really sound research. As Dr. Craigen shared, we have more transparency in this vaccine process, in the development, in the research, and now in the administration than we've ever had. And throughout the process, we have Black scientists who are involved, Black healthcare providers, Black public health experts. And it's for that reason that I decided last September to participate in the Oxford AstraZeneca trial. Initially, I was doing a documentary. It was a co-production with the BBC and CNN. And as I learned more, as I met top epidemiologists in the country who were really coming to grips with the COVID-19 scourge, and I was in Alabama, and they were debating, do we open up our schools? And unfortunately, we've seen now that that was quite disastrous in Alabama, and the second wave has hit that state very hard. That I realized that if we were going to get back to a semblance of normalcy, we needed more Black participation in the trials because obesity is such a problem. Our comorbidities, we are often essential workers. We're the ones who are out there driving the trucks, teaching the children, driving the buses, in healthcare. I knew that there needed to be representation to make sure that these vaccines were safe. And so I'm blessed to be healthy. I'm blessed to be right in that demographic that gets really hit hard. I'm in my 50s. And I just felt this pull to participate. So I got my first shot September 3rd. And I did a little happy dance because I started to feel symptoms. I felt, my body was under siege, and I had some fever, I had some chills, but after 24 hours that subsided. And then there was a pause. The Oxford AstraZeneca trial had a patient in the UK who had an adverse reaction. Later, it turned out to not be related to the vaccine, but they paused and did the research and provided full transparency. I received the booster shot in November. I still wear a mask. It's a double-blind study, and so I don't know if I actually got the vaccine or not, but I had a 66% chance of actually receiving the vaccine. And I want to read something to you. I've been speaking to several organizations about my experience as a participant, and I got this message. It was the week right after Christmas, and this was a woman who heard one of my talks, and she said, "Hello, Maria. Thank you for your honesty and your perspective about the vaccine in the interview that you provided. I was one who was adamant to not get the vaccine. But as I began reading and as I listened to you and others, I started talking to friends and family in the healthcare industry. I began to think differently. Then I listened to the interview, and not only did your interview solidify my receiving the vaccine, I have also signed up for a clinical trial. I agree with you that we need to be represented, and knowing how medicine and vaccines affect us. I'm a fellow Baltimorean. That made me cry. I feel kind of teary now reading that because this is what it's all about. This is why we're here. We don't want anyone to have an empty seat at their table next Thanksgiving or this coming Christmas. We want us to survive, and not just survive, but to thrive. I think if we don't have more of these forums, if we're not speaking truth to power, and making sure that people are receiving the same care that our former president received. If they're not receiving a place in line to be vaccinated, then we can only look around and look to our left and look to our right and say, what have we done about this? So I'm grateful to be a participant in this group. I'm grateful now to be an executive producer at the Black News Channel, that we're focused on getting this information out to Black people, because oftentimes we find ourselves holding up our hands saying, hey, what about us? We're not those people anymore. We're not going to allow that anymore. We are now saying things need to change, and we're demanding and deserving of that change. So again, it's just wonderful to be here. NAACP, thank you for making sure that we are disseminating important, truthful, transparent information, and that we are providing answers that can save lives.
Maria, thank you very much. You have a very compelling story. I wanted to turn to the chat. Did anyone have any questions about Maria's personal experience with the vaccine or anything else that she covered?
And I provided my email. And so for some, this is very personal. And so if you're thinking about participating in research, and believe me, you don't have to be like me, very public about your decision, feel free to email me or find me on Instagram. It's Maria Luisa Lives. I'll put it in the chat, and hop into my DMs. Like I am here to share my story so it could help save someone's life.
Excellent, excellent. All right, thank
There was one question in the chat that just came in from Beverly. She asked if your trial was related to cancer. Is that?
Oh no, this was a COVID-19 vaccine by Oxford AstraZeneca.
Okay.
you.
Yeah, and there are no other questions in the chat for you, but thank you so much, Maria. That was very, very good to know.
Very compelling. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you
very much. Okay, so moving on, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm going to start now. We're going to shift gears a little bit. We're actually moving to a more specific topic, in that we are going to hear from Sherese Buie, and we're happy to have Sherese here with us because of her role, her local role. Sherese is actually with the EEOC Baltimore field office. So very excited. She's an enforcement supervisor and a supervisory investigator with the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity. Ms. Buie was raised and educated right in Baltimore City, Maryland, and she began working with the EEOC in 2008. She successfully developed various systematic and nationwide investigations pertaining to, systemic, let me do that, pertaining to employment discrimination based on both race, age, national origin, and disability. Ms. Buie is committed to eradicating discrimination in the workplace and promoting equality. We're very happy to have her here in the light of Governor Hogan's announcements and schools reopening and essential workers. Like, there's so many people that need to understand how this affects them in the workplace. So I'm going to allow Ms. Buie to take over. And again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here on this evening. And I thoroughly enjoyed both doctors and Maria that came before me. Very informative session on tonight. I took some notes and I got a lot of helpful information. So again, thank you for having me. For those of you who are not familiar with what I do in the EEOC is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. We enforce anti-discrimination laws, including Title VII, which is your civil rights laws that Dr. King worked for. It prohibits discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex. We enforce the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, which prohibits discrimination based on your age for those 40 years of age or older. And most importantly, among everything else that we do, we enforce the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Rehabilitation Act. And that's the most relative act for tonight's conversation. The Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA, it applies to private employers with 15 or more employees. It applies to both state and local government employers, employment agencies, as well as labor unions. The EEOC laws that we enforce continue to apply during the COVID pandemic. They don't interfere with an employer's ability to follow the guidelines and suggestions made by the CDC or local public health officials or even the governor. However, we still have a say in how those guidelines are followed within employers. And I want to just highlight some of the general concerns that we've gotten from individuals who filed charge with us since the pandemic began, and those who just had concerns regarding what their rights were in the workplace. And so we just want to go